On January 6th, 2 weeks before Donald Trump's inauguration, the nation's top intelligence officials arrived at Trump Tower in New York.
This is the Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, CIA Director John Brennan, FBI Director Jim Comey.
They wanted to present to him their findings about Russian interference in the election. They thought it would be a tense meeting.
I don't think anybody knows it was Russia that broke into the DNC. She's saying Russia, 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 but maybe it was. I mean, it could be Russia, but it could also be China. It could also be lots of other people. It also could be somebody sitting on their bed that weighs 400 pounds, okay?
They're bracing for a blow-up. One of the participants that we talked to said they expected to be thrown out of the room. And weirdly, the opposite happens. Weirdly, it's a very subdued meeting.
Trump seemed to accept what they presented to him. He didn't throw out any fanciful conspiracy theories as they thought he might have.
His aides follow that meeting. They see this as progress and are trying to cement this. They think that if Trump could really, truly bring himself to accept this, he'd be able to put it behind him.
They got to a point where President-elect Trump would do a press conference on January 11th.
As far as hacking, I think it was Russia.
But then he immediately regretted it.
Tells one of his aides, that wasn't me. That's not what I think. And from there forward, you see him continue to return to this really defiant posture.
And, you can talk all you want about Russia, which was all a, fake news fabricated deal to try and make up for the loss of the Democrats.
President Obama had planned to punish Moscow when the campaign was over, but he assumed it would only be a first step, that Hillary Clinton would do more. When Trump shocked the world on election night, holding Russia accountable took on new urgency.
A convoy of buses rolls out of a Russian diplomatic compound in Maryland. Inside,
Obama took his parting shot on December 29th, ordering the seizure of 2 Russian-owned compounds, one on the eastern shore of Maryland, the other on Long Island in New York.
These compounds function mainly as retreats for Russian officials who are stationed here in the United States. But they also served another purpose, at least according to American security officials. Both compounds are believed to have been bases of espionage for Russia.
My hope is that the president-elect is going to similarly be concerned with making sure that we don't have potential foreign influence in our election process.
In late May, though, the Washington Post learned that Trump was already considering returning the compounds to Moscow.
There was immediate reaction in Congress and immediate reaction from the public. What are you doing? We're just still coming to terms with what just happened in the election. Why would you be giving these back? They seem to back away from it.
In fact, the plan was quietly moving ahead. On July 6th, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson sent an informal communication to the Kremlin offering to give back the compounds, but without diplomatic immunity.
Officials we've talked to said that there is no scenario in which Tillerson would do that without approval directly from Trump.
I think what the State Department is hoping is that they can improve relations with the Russians, and that the Russians who've been threatening to expel U.S. diplomats and scale back the size of the American embassy in Moscow may take a less harsh line.
It's abundantly clear that that is not the impact that it had, because Russia ultimately rejects this overture, regards it as, in fact, an insult.
The yeas are 98.
The administration's bid
2.
for better relations with Russia was dealt a further blow later that month when the Senate overwhelmingly approved new sanctions against Moscow.
We basically said we want to make sure that the president will not lift these sanctions. He will, in fact, impose them. We put requirements in the bill which most presidents have never seen.
They build into this legislation language that really restricts his ability to undo what they are forcing him to do. And that's unprecedented.
And Trump just stewed over that. He got angry. One of his advisors told me he was raging mad.
The sanctions bill had been in the works for months, but after Trump's first meeting with Vladimir Putin at the G20 summit in Hamburg, senators rushed to pass it.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. President Putin and I have been discussing various things, and I think it's going very well.
Trump meets with Putin, asks him about whether it's true that Russia interfered in the election, which is kind of a weird thing to do. It's an interesting interaction that only gets more interesting a week or two later when it's revealed that there's a dinner for heads of state as part of this event, where Trump leaves his seat at the table at one point in the evening and goes over and has a private conversation with Putin. And they speak for some time.
They were alone. This was not a scheduled meeting. The American advisors were not there to hear the conversation or to try to shape it or influence it in any way. And it shocked a lot of people here in Washington, especially on Capitol Hill.
They're very concerned that there's some sort of secret plan to roll back sanctions on Russia.
That meeting was sort of a spark that ignited the sanctions bill in the Senate. They started to lose faith that President Trump would act responsibly on his own.
The investigation into Russian interference now threatens to consume the Trump presidency.
As much as this White House has tried and would like to put this all behind it, the story just keeps getting larger and more complicated, and this investigation seems to continue to grow in scope.
But Trump still sees Putin as a potential ally, someone he can do business with.
One advisor close to the president told me, look, there are 3 men around the world, leaders that the president admires most. He admires Putin of Russia, he admires President Xi of China, and he admires Erdogan of Turkey. All 3 of these men are essentially dictators. They rule with complete authority, and they've had a very questionable record on human rights and other measures. But President Trump looks past that. He sees strength, and he wants to have that same strength here in the United States.
Well, I think he also sees the relationship as a way to just solve a lot of the biggest, most nettlesome problems that he's got and that the world has got, whether it be North Korea or Syria or Iran.
Hardliners will now gain ground.
I think he just sort of believes that good relations, if he could just have the relationship with Putin that he has aspired to, if he were just allowed to have that a lot of these other problems would melt away.
Trump has always been reluctant to criticize the Russian president.
Putin's a killer. A lot of killers. We got a lot of killers. Why, you think our country's so innocent? You think our country's so innocent?
When Putin has denied meddling in the election, Trump has taken him at his word.
President Putin and/or Russia interfered in the election. What I said there, I'm surprised that there's any conflict on this. What I said there is that I believe he believes that, and that's very important for somebody to believe. I believe that he feels that he and Russia did not meddle in the election.
His refusal to say even a single negative word about Vladimir Putin raises a lot of suspicions among his critics and also among, frankly, a number of Republican senators and congressmen who are otherwise supportive of this president.
His aides say there's a simpler and less sinister reason why he won't acknowledge Russian interference.
You know, to the president, personally, he feels like the Russia question is an effort to delegitimize his electoral victory.
But it was a very substantial victory. Do you agree with that?
We know how much that victory means to him. We know how frequently he talks about how many electoral college votes he got. He points to maps that show the states that he won. And here, constantly, he's reminded that, oh, but Russia was working to help you. Russia was out there helping you. Russia was interfering and making this happen.
In Congress and intelligence circles, Russian meddling remains a pressing concern.
In the case of the Russians, they do pose an existential threat to the United States.
But inside the White House, a code of silence is observed.
There's not been a cabinet meeting about this issue. There has not been a major National Security Council meeting about this issue. So there's a 5.5-foot rule that officials in the administration talk about, which means you can deal with all these Russia matters, but you take it just up to 5.5 feet from the Oval Office. Don't go in that door in the Oval Office with the information because the president does not seem willing to engage in that discussion.
We end up in a situation that is, without, to me, obvious parallel in history. A president who, because of his own personal insecurities, his refusal to accept what even many in his own administration regard as objective reality, impairs the government's ability to deal with a legitimate and proven security threat.
The White House defends its handling of Russia and Russian interference.
One administration official said in an interview, we don't irritate Russia, we deter Russia, and that's completely the reverse of what the Obama administration did. So they see a lot of value in having the positive relationship between Trump and Putin.
The White House, when they talk about this relationship, is quick to say that there's really nothing to see here. Don't listen to the president's words. look at our policies.
But in this administration, it is often difficult to tell who makes policy and who, if anyone, speaks for the president.
There's a real clear tension at times between what other members of the administration say about Russia and what the president himself says about it.
He will reaffirm America's commitment to the alliance.
It leads to, obviously, confusion among our allies. What is U.S. policy toward Russia? Is it what the Secretary of State says, or is it what the president has tweeted?
In this confusion, Moscow sees a return on its investment.
U.S. intelligence agencies continue to collect new information about what Russia did last year, but also about how the Kremlin evaluates what it accomplished, what it didn't accomplish. But the big takeaway is that Russia sees this operation as an enormous success, as having been well worth the cost.
The election of Donald Trump has done little to improve U.S.-Russia relations, but it may have achieved a more profound goal.
The initial overriding objective for Russia here was basically to take the United States down a few notches, right? It was to settle some scores.
In Russia's view, America has been weakened as a nation on the world stage because of the discord in our political system right now.
We're certainly a more fractious democracy than we were. They certainly undermined confidence in our democracy.
And the weaker our democracy, the more easily it is undermined.
In all of our interviews, I've yet to encounter anybody who doesn't expect fully that Russia will do this again.
What we have right now, 1 year, less than a year, ahead of the 2018 midterms with the 2020 presidential election around the corner, is a president in Donald Trump who refuses to fully accept what happened in 2016 and is not taking active steps to safeguard the American electoral system and our democracy from a future attack.
What the Russians did really well is they were students on our culture. They really understood our weaknesses, our divisions. The more divided we are, the more at war with ourselves we are, the weaker our institutions are, the greater our distrust in democracy, the more vulnerable we are.